Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Story. I'm Daniel Parker, and I am the writer and creator of the comic book that you just saw the trailer for, Guardian Angel. Normally, I would put the page up, but my computer is kind of acting weird right now, so I don't want to do anything. Want to?
Yep, just remember Indiegogo, Guardian Angel. Search it online. It should come up.
Yes, yes. Um, but yeah, sign up for the mailing list. You'll get a free art print if you're amongst the next 50 signups. And you'll also be able to access a tier where you can get an alternate version cover. So,
Yep, extra virgin comic books.
yes, extra virgin. And Bogdan just turned in the 16th page of the book. So 16 out of 62 have been drawn and colored so far. So,
Nice, nice.
yes.
So 25% done.
Yes. Yes.
If
Very.
we were a professional program, we'd have some like sort of little confetti animation. We could go.
Yes. Yeah. Um. So, and of course, joining me is the man over here.
Yes. See you. Okay. Damn it! I will eventually get this mirrored direction right.
Yeah.
You have the unfair advantage. You had all those months of while I was a hidden icon.
Yeah.
Anyways, Darth Bobcat, also known as DB Fastbinder, author of Confessions of the Magpie Wizard, available on Kindle and also Patreon, Railroad, and other fine places for the newer books.
Yes. And links to everything are in the description box down below. So.
Yep.
Yes. Uh, but yeah. So for this edition of Tuesdays with Story, we're talking about basically how culture, other cultures that we as writers were not familiar with can oftentimes be very good influences on your own writing.
Hmm.
So, for example, uh, DB and I are to varying degrees, varying levels of weeb. Um, we like our anime, we like our manga, um, and so if you read read my stuff, you read DB's stuff, you'll definitely see some anime manga influences in there.
It's funny. I've had people read my stuff and have different takeaways. Like some people, like I don't see what's very light novel inspired about this, and then another person said hyper weebery.
Yeah.
So it's like, I guess you either detect it or you don't.
Yes. And yeah, and in my case, I mean, if you kind of look at it, there's definitely a little bit of anime and manga inspired, especially with Ghost in the Shell.
Yep.
Big influence on the Guardian Angel series.
I can see
Um,
that now that you mention it.
was that?
I can see that now that you mention it.
Yeah. And I also say too with Bogdan, he's been influenced quite a bit by manga art as well, especially Kentaro Miura. He's
Yeah, he looks kind of berserkish.
Yes. Um, but yeah, and so we look at that, and then but they're also obviously you don't want to necessarily limit yourself to one area of the world. There are plenty of places where you can look and you can find inspiration in some pretty unlikely places.
Yep. Right, and there's like different degrees of it. For example, looking up folklore of different parts of the world, you can if you're writing a fantasy story, that can give you some ideas for either the story itself or maybe you go, okay, so I'm kind of settling this in. I'm just going to make up an area. Setting this in kind of like a Southeast Asian context, so maybe I'll look up some of the folklore from there
Hmm.
because it'll help you get an idea of what the culture would be like. You might be able to make up a similar story or repurpose the same story, but it also kind of gives you an idea of some of the morality and you know and personality of the culture.
Yeah, and that can be very helpful when you're if you're telling a story within the framework of a culture or a nation, being able to understand where, like you said, where a lot of their morality comes from, or where their way of living and that sort of thing.
Right? It's like I've never sat down and read a book uh, about how to get around in Japan or anything like that, or like I've never sat down and read a book about how the Japanese train system works. I did have a game that explained a little bit of it once that I played, but by and large, just osmosis. There's a lot of things you just figure out over time.
Yeah.
Like oh, okay, so people mostly take the train places, and oh, a large number of people still have non-smartphones.
Mm,
Yeah, like they have these little they still have like little keypads, or they use the number pad or whatever.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess that kind of makes sense. Especially although in Japan, like I think they either go smartphone, or like I think I've even seen like flip phones too,
Yeah,
to use those, which yeah.
right. Now some of that is you have to account for some series have been in production for a very long time,
Hmm.
so maybe the anime only, maybe the anime is adapting a manga from 20 years ago where that would have been the norm.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, like Parasite, the anime that was actually an '80s series, but they threw in smartphones to try to seem contemporary-ish.
Hmm. Yeah, and Steins Gate, that takes place in 2010, 2011,
Hmm.
and that's when the first season premiered, and then I think like the new season came out, I think like four
4 or 5 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago, yeah. But they kept it in 2010, 2011, so you still saw all the flip phones and everything.
Yep. Now you can get in trouble if you just assume that if you just uncritically absorb whatever media you're getting from that culture. Like, so, what the hell, be Cress? The average cup size in Japan is not J. um, there are not swarms of women looking to circle around one beta guy. um, it is in fact still illegal over there for teachers to date students. or,
Really?
or former students. Like, and
Ah,
it's definitely a thing over here in the U.S. Like, you can get in big trouble if they decide that you were grooming somebody, even if you know, like, even if you have a teacher and they meet a student when they're 18 and they aren't really their direct teacher, you can still get in trouble because that's a ethical violation there.
yes. Yeah.
You know, so you have to actually like supplement with a little bit of research at least, but you can figure out a lot of things about a culture by the media they put out. Um, oh, funny example. Looking at American TV, uh, a YouTuber I follow says when he asks people outside the U.S., what's the demographic makeup of the U.S., they go, well, you're like a third black and 10% Asian, and when like that's like and da 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 is like, well, no, you're like overestimating all those percentages by like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now there are definitely places in the U.S. that are like that, but you wouldn't want. Oh man, Uh, let's get into that's a knock on my door there, but I'm going to ignore that for the time being
Okay.
because I'm guessing. Yep, UPS.
Ah, okay.
I live in a nice neighborhood. Nothing will happen to it.
Right.
But so just to get an idea of how important it is to actually buttress it with uniform or with stuff. Imagine that you had somebody who never opened up a book about the U.S. or did any actual research for the U.S., and they decided to write a story set in the U.S. And they went, well, I saw in a movie that Americans wear cowboy hats. So, like old West movies, so I'll have everybody wear a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And Apparently, they all eat bacon all the time, so every scene they'll be eating bacon, or every breakfast or every meal scene they'll be eating bacon. And oh, apparently I don't know, they all drive pickup trucks. So everybody's gonna have a pickup truck, and but they also love expensive coffee. So they'll wear their cowboy hats, and oh, I also see Americans wear scarves. So we'll have everybody put a scarf on, not realizing those are different aesthetics and demographics and everything.
Yes.
Oh, and they'll listen to rap music all in every scene. That, that's how out of touch and stupid you can look if you don't actually get some context for what you're picking up on.
Yes. Yeah. You definitely want to research. Yeah. Research your the culture you're writing, the country that you're writing about before you yeah before you do any actually writing. Otherwise, yeah, you end up in a situation like that. Yeah.
Yep. Or you do like I do, and you set your story 20 or 30 years in the future, have a massive demonic invasion sweep the planet, and make a lot of refugees run all over or end up all over the place, and they've had to rebuild the towns and cities to accommodate them. That way, you can make up a certain amount of stuff, and you can go, well, I mean, I keep saying that's different.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
you avoid a lot of cultural misunderstandings that way.
yes, that's also the benefit of fantasy things. It's like if you decide to set your story in a fantasy world that happens to resemble, I don't know, medieval Iceland. You have to. It's like, where do you want to do your work? Do you want to do your work making up all of the details of this fake Iceland, or do you want to use your time looking up details about medieval Iceland?
Mhm.
Because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Like you can if you set your story in medieval Iceland, you're like, and you realize that okay, it's set in 1159. Oh no, 1159. The city I was trying to, or the town I was wanting to build this in didn't exist until 1180. I'm gonna have to go back and rework everything. Uh,
Yeah.
on the flip side, if you're like, well, my fake Iceland, do what kind of crops grow here? I am gonna have to do a lot of research and make this up. And where if you have real Iceland as your template, you can just go, well, according to this registry I found, they grew X amount of wheat and whatever, whatever, whatever. So it's like, do you want your work to be stuff you're having to pluck out of your head, or do you want your work to be book learning?
Hmm.
Speaking of book learning, you picked a good week to suggest this, Daniel, because I've been reading this one manga called Golden Kamui, which has a very good example of, we were talking about the disadvantages of making shit up
Yeah.
or making wild assumptions. You end up with rap loving cowboy hipsters.
Mhm.
Um, this is kind of like the opposite problem. So this series is about a soldier from from the Russo-Japanese War who gets involved in this plot where they somebody had stolen a bunch of gold from an Ainu tribe, and the Ainu are like a native people of northern Japan. Kind of has some similarities to Pacific Northwest Indians, and at least in terms of some like the architecture and way of life and everything. And they have a bunch of gold stolen from them, and so the soldier's trying to help them get it back, and the map is tattooed on the body of like 18 people or something like that. So like everybody's trying to skin everybody else, and so like the parts of the book that are good are the guy has cute interactions with the girl, and she's a fun character, and like and she eh, and there's like insane action here, like literally bears ripping guys' faces off. You can see bear on
Ye-
the back cover,
Ooh.
and the art is really good. The downside is that a lot of the girls' dialogue can end up. I think this is also not helped by kind of clunky translation. A lot of the girls' dialogue is, oh, we Ainu do this. Oh, we caught the rabbit, and we can now make something called sipapap. And when you skin the rabbit, the rabbit's skin comes off cleanly because there isn't much fat this time of year. And oh, we like to eat the brain raw with a little bit of salt. It's very tasty. You should. I'll let you have it. And we Ainu think that the spirits that there are kamui, the gods that are everywhere in everything, and we love to eat sea otters, and I killed this sea otter with a poisoned arrow, so we can't eat the organs. So I'm sorry, no brain this time. I know how much you liked it. So it's like half the dialogue is like, okay, Mr. Author or Ms. Author, Satoru, Mr. Author. Um, okay, we're very impressed that you did a whole bunch of research about Ainu culture and legends and everything. We don't need every piece of it in this book.
Yes. Yes, we would like to. We'd like you to get to the story at some point.
Yeah, like volume 2 is almost all Ainu fun facts. And then, like in the last 2 chapters, it's like, oh man, this got good again. Oh damn it! Now I'm out of pages.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit like reading a story narrated by Cliff from Cheers. It's a little known fact that the Ainu, they eat the brains from from the sea otters.
Yeah, it's how to put it. Well, like there's this great book that I recommend for everybody called "How Not to Write a Novel," which
Mm,
was very instructive. One of the bits of advice there was that perhaps in the 19th century, when people didn't get around as much, there was a market for what they call the travel log, where you basically went somewhere, wrote about your experiences on the way, and just detailed where you went and what you did in order without necessarily having a storyline.
mhm.
There's this thing called Google now, so people don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
Now, my hope is that when Volume 3 finally shows up in the mail, that 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 you'll be past all of the I have to explain every single little thing about the Ainu so you can get the point.
Yes. Yeah, because you you want to watch more. You want to see more bears ripping people's faces off.
Yeah, bears ripping dudes' faces off.
Yes. um, but yeah, we obviously we're focusing a lot on Japan because like we said before, our a lot of our writings are heavily inspired and heavily influenced by the works in Japan. But obviously there are other places you can look to for inspiration. I mean, so I know in Italy, believe it or not, they when they were started making their own horror movies, they were largely inspired by our own horror movies. So the Draculas, the Frankenstein's, the Mummy, and all that good stuff. And so they started doing their own horror movies inspired from that. And then what they did was they incorporated another genre that uh, was also inspired by us, which is known as giallo. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that word right.
That sounds right enough.
Yeah. And I believe it means yellow in Italian. I think it
Hmm.
means yellow in Italian. Because the story now, the closest comparison I can make with us would be film noir. And it's called giallo. They were called giallo stories because they're pulp fiction um, stories that were printed on yellow paper. Um,
Okay.
yeah, that's where the term comes from. And then 70s, 80s, they started adapting, or the giallo became a subgenre of Italian horror. And if and I've watched a couple of giallo movies, and they're now I say they're strange because it's Italian, it's Italy, and it doesn't make the stories are very cheesy, and they can be a little over the top sometimes, but they've got a lot of people that really like them. Um, and uh, when when we were talking before the show, DB brought up *Malignant*,
Mhm.
and now I haven't seen *Malignant*, but I believe that it was a giallo inspired uh, movie, and you see that a lot. Like a lot of times, it's not really if you see something that's giallo now, it's like, oh, it's not technically giallo, it's inspired by giallo or
Mhm.
homage to it, which just means it's going to be weird as hell.
Weird and campy.
Yes.
Yeah. I was watching *Malignant* with a horror buff, and he was pointing out the giallo references, like bright red lights and pink backgrounds and all sorts of just obnoxious color choices.
Yes. Yeah. Italians really like bright colors, especially red.
Hmm.
Um, if you ever watch a Dario Argento movie, Dario Argento is one of the
Mhm.
god for the kings of Italian horror. He loves the color red, and you'll see it everywhere. And yeah, it's a lot of bright colors, and and also very bad dubbing.
You almost wonder if it's on purpose at this point.
I think so. Yeah. Well, actually, there was a little interesting fact. I heard Eli Roth talking about this, that in Italy, like after like right around well during World War II and up until like I think up until recently, uh, all of the Italian movies had to be dubbed over. Always had to be dubbed over.
Hmm.
Like you couldn't like they had to always had to go back and re put the voices in, and that was a holdover from Mussolini,
Hmm.
because he didn't want any anti government stuff in any of these
Oh.
movies. So yeah, that's why every Italian movie always had to be dubbed over, even if they were speaking the language that was spoken that they're speaking, they still had to dub it over.
Uh, He should. He didn't realize it was much cheaper just to buy Hollywood, like the Chinese did.
Yeah.
They'll censor themselves
Yes.
for that sweet 25 cents on the dollar.
Hmm. Yeah. uh, but yeah, it's and if you go and if you watch like a lot of the horror movies in the 80s definitely had a lot of influence, were definitely many of them were influenced by what they were doing in Italy. um Example of that was Dress to Kill, by directed by Brian De Palma, and there's a lot of you know cinematic. De Palma made a lot of cinematic choices in that movie that were very closely resembled giallo horror. So
Yep, and well, and you were telling me earlier that Giallo was inspired by our horror, but also by pulp movies of all things.
yeah.
And that's kind of the interesting thing, that's where like yeah, not to yeah, I'll get a little not entirely political, but more like culture war-y. That's where some of the talk about cultural appropriation is kind of silly, in my opinion, because
Yeah.
um, by the nature of it, culture is like a game that we play with each other.
Hmm.
It's like a person in one, like a person. Oh, just let's see here. Try to think of an example. To you, like a Japanese example. A lot of what we consider like if you go to a Japanese restaurant here in the U.S., what you'll see there is often referred to over there as Western cooking because it was inspired by uh, like recipes they got from European traders, like tempura, which is fried vegetables and shrimp, was inspired by something that the Portuguese would eat on Fridays back in the days when Catholics weren't allowed to eat meat on Fridays.
Mm.
So the tempura was like a reference, like something about temper, like time or something like that. I forget the exact name of it, but the original dish. But they're like cultural borrowing happens all over the place.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's pretty amazing how like how homogenized the world really can be, you know. Um, and going back to another Japanese example, so bubblegum crisis.
Hmm.
The original bubblegum crisis is, I mean, straight almost a complete rip off of Blade Runner.
Yeah, Blade Runner. Like there are like two movies that explain anime, or at least like heavy sci-fi anime. Uh, Blade Runner and The Matrix.
Yes.
Like you look at like, there are still a lot of Japanese games like the Final Fantasy games still feel like they're trying to be The Matrix
Hmm.
20 years later.
Yeah, and the Matrix was heavily inspired by anime and manga.
Like Ghost in
Uh,
the Shell, yeah.
Ghost in the Shell. Yes.
But that's like the back and forth then. Like
Yeah.
Blade Runner had some DNA that probably ended up in Ghost in the Shell because it was similar sort of transhumanism
Hmm.
thinking. And then the Wachowski said, "Ooh, we like that.
Yeah.
Uh, Let's make a kung fu movie, and we'll have a nice dollop of Ghost in the Shell there." And then the Japanese directors went, "Ooh, black leather and slow motion. We like that idea. Let's use it forever."
Yes. Yeah, it's a, I'm not going to sing the song, but it is a small world after all.
Yep.
um
Now, like I was talking earlier about the whole cultural appropriation, it would be kind of scummy to just take a traditional folk story from another country and do absolutely nothing creative with it
yeah.
and then call it your own. It would also be kind of scummy, in my opinion, to take a legend and subvert it,
Mm.
um, to like prop up your own culture. Like, oh, that's like an example here. I can't think of it necessarily. Think of a real world example off the top of my head. But what if you had, say, actually, here's one for you: Turkish Rambo. There are a lot of Turkish knockoff movies,
Hmm.
and if am recalling the plot, it might not be Turkish Rambo, but there was some like action movie in that vein where the villains of it were it was either Armenian or Kurdish terrorists being propped up by the United States,
Okay.
which reflects that country's own issues.
Yeah.
Or if you like, actually, you could almost argue, it would be really scummy for me to take a book of Japanese folklore. I was trying to hold like a book here, but I realized my
Yeah.
hand was off camera.
Okay.
And Last Jedi, it
Oh yeah.
like a oh man, you know that Peach Boy, yeah, the one who has the fun adventures with the monkey and stuff, yeah. He's a broken old man, and everything he ever did was a lie he made up. Also, the
Yeah.
monkey has cancer.
Oh,
What's the point of that story? Stop. Are you secretly Tom King? I think you're secretly Tom King.
you don't want a Tom King or Ryan Johnson anything.
Right. Oh man, which is Tom King? You're less likely to want to slit your wrist afterwards. Or
Yeah.
maybe Ryan Johnson. You're less likely to want to slit your wrist afterwards. You just get angry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just want to grab his round head and just. Yeah. But yeah, uh, it's another Italian thing. Westerns,
Hmm.
like our Western movies, in had a great influence on Italian cinema. I mean, they made their own westerns. The spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood.
Yep, and that's another cultural ping pong of stuff too, or cultural uh, I guess relay race there, because it's like he had the samurai cinema took inspiration from some noir movies. The samurai cinema, they took the samurai and put them in cowboy hats and called them westerns to an
Yeah,
or like the later on, although there were westerns before that, but like the
yeah.
some of like the structure of it,
Hmm.
and then that went over to Italy and Spain, and they and well, of course they filmed them over there because it was cheaper to film over there.
Hmm.
But you had like a lot of Italian directors making these things. Like, okay, so it's the American West as envisioned, with influence from Japanese culture, as influenced with vision from American culture.
Yes.
So it's just like this. It's really just fascinating when you go into it, just how much borrowing there is over time.
Oh yeah. Well, you mentioned samurai with western. I mean, the Magnificent Seven is just a remake of Seven Samurai.
What? You mean the story about seven mercenaries who go to a town that's being attacked by marauders who are hired to save it, and they mostly die at the end?
Yes.
Yeah. That wasn't a wholly original concept.
No, no, it wasn't.
Oh man, Uh, illusion shattered.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um, but I guess what we're getting at is, like it is pretty amazing how, like, this ping pong effect that we see where, um, you know we, you might think that you're being influenced by another culture, but in reality, that culture is probably being influenced by your culture, and you just
Right.
don't really see it.
Or you're like 4 or 5 steps away from it,
Hmm.
which is why it's a good idea to be try to be well read on some things. Uh, well, and it's like and kind of understand where things come from. Like say, how many royalty checks should Japanese video games be paying to the Tolkien estate at this point?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Um, well, and yeah, it's yeah, or Lucasfilm,
Hmm.
or to Star Trek. And
Right, and I think that's just because um, a culture a culture's art is kind of the expression of not only what the author themselves is about, but you can also see things about the culture behind them
Mhm.
by it, including even if the author hates their culture, you can kind of see it in the negative image.
Yeah, and yeah, and I would also say too, like, when you're looking at, sometimes with their media, um, you know, where oh god, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, it's I will say, like, when if you're reading something by somebody, yeah, it's probably good to know a little bit about the author. That way, you kind of understand where he or she or they are coming from. You know, in terms of how they're doing the story. So, like for example, Ano Hideki Anno, who did Evangelion. Um, if you watch the series, or if you watch the later movies, like, a lot of things that he was going through, he put into that series, and a lot of those concepts are universal for everybody. Um, like, I mean, like depression, for example. Like he's
Mhm.
struggled with depression his whole life, and you know, and you watch Evangelion, there's a lot of that going on. You know,
Well, and you know what depressed him partially was I made these girls to be off-putting and scary. Why do you want to why do you want to sleep with them, weirdos?
yeah, yeah. What? Why do you have a thing for Asuka? She's horrible.
Well, apparently the one that really disturbed him was like, wait, Rei Ayanami has no human emotions. That's the point of her.
Yeah,
Stop finding that cute.
yeah.
God damn it.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and but the other thing too, because I watched the Amazon Prime documentary about him, and he if you watch you watch a lot of the robot battles, the robots fighting the angels. Um, at some point, one of the robots loses a limb, either an arm or a leg, or and that's because his father was a logger,
Mm,
and his father lost his leg in a logging accident.
ugh.
Yeah. So that's so when you so when a robot loses a limb, that's him honoring his father
Right, him dealing with that.
and dealing with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of things, so I will say the one downside of having a deeper knowledge of the media of a culture that you're encountering is that
Mhm.
it can make things seem less original.
Mm.
Like we were talking a minute ago about how much money do people owe the Tolkien estate ultimately, especially via Gary Gygax because he
Mhm.
like popularized it,
Yeah.
or at least genericized it, like made people think, oh, dwarves aren't just a thing for certain fantasy stories. But if you know anything about the Japanese series Ultraman, suddenly Pokemon, Evangelion, uh, a lot of things stop seeming so cool and original. You're like, oh, that's an Ultraman reference. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that does tend to happen a lot, especially, whether it's Japan or here or, or
Yeah, like,
anywhere else. Yeah,
like, like let me share my screen for a moment here.
okay.
Example from My Hero Academia. A friend of mine has been taking me through various Ultraman series in the last bit. And so this character, and I can't quite see the screen at the same time showing this off. So
Okay. Oh,
yeah, this character, who's a minor hero at the school, has the power to change size, just like Ultra Seven, who no, I just want Ultra Seven this time. Bam.
yeah. Yeah, basically.
You start looking like Chi Chi from Dragon Ball when she first showed up had the same sort of bladed hat, and she would throw it at people like Ultra Seven does. Uh, People like the way that they catch things in Pokeballs is Ultra Seven's capsules, where he would catch some of the monsters that he defeated.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the, like that's it's like Superman but on steroids. As far as
Yes.
how much people refer to it constantly.
Yeah, it's I mean, when you get a property like that that has that much influence on the culture, it's kind of hard not to reference it sometimes.
Right. And that's where like you can get a sense of like, and now, of course, let's say, and I'm just gonna change from weeby stuff over here. Let's say you wanted to set a story in England in a certain time period.
Mhm.
You don't have to go back and try to read every single book or watch every single TV show. You can actually probably talk with people. Thanks to the internet, you could probably go on Twitter and say, "Hey, I'm trying to read. So I'm thinking about writing a story that takes place in Kent, England in the 1970s. Are there any books or movies set in that place in time that people can recommend? And people might just come out of the woodwork to make suggestions. Like,
Hmm.
well, not Kent, but this movie took place in Bristol, and that's,
Hmm.
and that might give you an idea of some of the slang and everything.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, speaking of the British. For those of you who probably can't get if you can't guess by my last name, I'm mostly British. Um, and one of the things I try to I'll try to do at a certain point is add some humorous elements to my stories. I will say my superhero comic book that I have that's uh, kind of it's in the works right now is going to have a little more. It's more lighthearted than Guardian Angel.
Mhm.
Um, but I am a but I'm very much a uh, lover of British humor, and I try to work that type of humor into my writing when I can. Um, so when you look at that, I mean, I when I was a kid, I watched Faulty Towers, and a little bit of Monty Python, and then later
Mhm.
on, stuff like Blackadder and that kind of thing. It kind of not only helps with the humor, but also like you were saying, if you want to know a little bit more about the culture of Britain, that's a great way to get into it.
Mhm. Again, with the previews, as we said before, uh,
Yes,
whenever I
yes.
think about awful accents or not getting a dialect or something, I think of this. So there's the TV show Axe Cop, which was based on a comic book, which was just basically this bombastic, over the top superhero parody about a guy who was a cop and wielded the perfect fireman's axe. It was written by a 5-year-old originally, or at least conceived of by a 5-year-old.
Oh.
Yeah, it's basically, it was his older brother Malachi, who was a comic book artist, would like talk with his brother, and the brother would throw ideas at him, and he would shape them into a semi-coherent story.
Ah.
When I say semi-coherent, I mean like he would go along like, oh, the he got flute cop got dinosaur blood on him, so he turned into a dinosaur cop. Oh, and then he ate an avocado, so he turned into avocado cop. So that type of logic. But
Mhm.
in the TV show, there was this one bit where they're going to England to save the Queen. I think I want to say no, they're trying to find this woman's dead father on an island, or she doesn't know that he's dead,
Mhm.
and she has the worst British accent, and like, oh. Uh, uh, there's my father on the telly. That's what we call the television in London, England. Uh, 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 or like, oh, we don't call it an elevator, we call it a lift. It's the law, or we have to. It's just like, that's my greatest fear, and it's why, even though I have British characters, I don't lean too deeply into the dialect, just because it's like, you know what? Nope, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will. I'll confess, like with one of my characters in Guardian Angel, I do try to. I do give her a bit more British. Give her more British sayings and stuff. But yeah, it's you kind of worry about like leaning into it too much, because then it's like you're creating a parody or a
Mhm.
caricature of what like we Americans think Brits are like.
Yeah, it's a fine line between trying to be authentic and oops, cranked it up to 11.
But yeah. Yeah, well, and I will say, like, with England, especially like you get further north,
Hmm.
like those accents, you can't understand a word they're saying. Yeah, yeah. You see, walk is you can pay the okay.
English, do you speak it?
Yes. but but yeah, it's and kind of go a little bit back to it, like um part of knowing the culture is in knowing how the people are in that culture
Mhm.
is is to your advantage, because like we were just saying, you don't want to create a parody, or or you end up creating a stereotype of a character, which sometimes, depending on the story, that might be a fun thing to have, but in other instances, maybe not so much.
Yeah, and like there's a great comedic history of stereotypes, like The Simpsons before they
Hmm.
started apologizing for it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, one of my favorite stories I ever heard was this guy talking about. So he it was an RPG podcast I used to listen to, and he had this group of players who would play with him, and they just would sometimes
Uh-oh.
pick an NPC and
Hmm.
just want to talk with that NPC for an hour. And so he'd have to make up all these details about the NPC.
Oh, jeez.
Um, and he they go and they go to a Korean deli at one point, or Korean convenience store in New York, I think.
Mm.
And he does this, like, I'm not going to do the accent right now, but like he does the kind of broken English accent for the guy. It's like they decide they like that, so they just kept chatting with him, trying to pump him for information and just generally talking with him. At the end of it, one of the characters goes, "Well, I use a spell to, because I can speak any language, to say thank you for your time, honored shopkeep." Uh, uh, in Korean. Okay, roll your dice. Okay, success. Okay, what does he say? What do you say? Speak English. It's America. It's like little things like that, where little like breaks in your continuity like that, where it's like you thought it was going to go one way, then it zigged the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of reminds me of there's a one episode of the King of Queens, when Kevin James Doug, when he goes to a Chinese food restaurant,
Hmm.
and he talks to the host and the guy, and he's of course he looks Asian,
Hmm.
but he has a British accent. And Toast like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting the British accent. And then he starts talking like a Chinese, with a broken English accent. He's like, oh, no, 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 it's fine, it's
Like, oh, are you disappointed? I can.
fine. Yeah. But yeah, it's and obviously a lot of this depends on the kind of the kind of story that you want to write, and if you in what kind of how you want the characters to be, and
Hmm.
everything, greatly depends on the obviously the cultural aspects of the character, or even the story.
Yeah. And I would say, as we're kind of getting close to the end, it, it's important to understand a character's culture because it's going to influence how they think. And
Mhm.
because culture is kind of like it's like the building blocks that you use for how you construct yourself to an extent, or how you think of yourself.
Right.
But you aren't 100% your culture. Like every culture has mores and rules, and like American culture, don't pick your nose,
Mhm.
or don't pick your nose in public. But does that mean that there are no people who pick their nose ever? No.
No. Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
And even the person picking their nose knows, it's not a good idea, but
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, might as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, uh, or it's like, I don't care. But and they can be grossed out all they like, but
Yeah.
they're like people are still generally aware of the rule.
Mhm.
So, uh, and so just getting an idea of, and actually that's where picking up a travel log might be a good idea, or like a travel book.
Mhm.
It's like 10 tips for tourists in country X, because you can kind of piece in there. Okay, what shouldn't I do? Oh, don't look people directly in the eye, or don't stare at this, or oh, it's rude to look at your ankle or look at their ankles or whatever. Just like it's culture is like a set of is like the rules of the game we play of life.
Mhm.
Like here's an example just in the United States. Typically for like African Americans, it's seen as polite to just like in their culture, in that subculture, it's seen as polite to not look somebody in the eye when you're talking to them, or at least like if it's a figure of authority, you might look away.
Mhm.
Where which is like for a white teacher, that can come across as, well, that little snot isn't paying attention.
Mhm.
Like they won't look at me when I'm talking with them. Like they're just being evasive when from their perspective, I know that's what you do when you're talking when somebody in authority is chatting with you. You don't look them right in the eye.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like just little details like that can influence how your characters behave.
Mhm. And even little details like that will go along with any readers from those cultures.
Right? You just want to make sure they don't go, that isn't what that's like. They're
Hmm.
like, the hell? Every Dutchman carries a fish in his pocket. Where the hell did he get that?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you mean every Brit has bad teeth? That's not true.
That's not true. Ow, that saltine cracker was so hard.
Yeah. Although my grandfather actually had a theory about that, about Brits with bad teeth.
Oh,
Is It's because in the First World War, all
mhm.
the men with good genes died. So all that were left were the men with these just really bad teeth. So they passed on the bad teeth to the subsequent generations.
That's possible.
Yeah.
The theory that the kind of twin theories that I heard is that it's because Europeans have been practicing dentistry for longer than in other places in the world. So teeth that would have gotten you yanked off the census before, because you would have had like an infection that would have killed you at a young age, are
Ah.
are still in the gene pool.
Ah.
And the second thing is that the National Health Service, doesn't really treat dentistry as separate from regular doctor's visits like we do in the U.S. So you don't have as many scheduled visits necessarily.
Ah.
It's
Ah.
like your general practitioner might be cleaning your teeth. This is just what I've heard. I haven't ever verified it,
Hmm.
but that's where like those are like the two those are the two theories there. Although your genetic bottleneck theory has a lot of possible has a lot of chance of influencing it too.
Yeah. Yeah. But but yeah, it's you know it's important to know, like, that not every you know not and you can't necessarily believe everything you hear,
Yeah.
you know especially old wives tales, or um urban legends about now, I will say, cultural certain urban legends from other cultures can make for some pretty interesting stories.
Yep. God, my friend Jimmy just texted me that big book of British smiles from the X Men, or X
The
from the
Simpsons.
Simpsons.
Yeah.
He's been listening along.
Okay. The big book
Let's
of British
let
smiles.
yeah. If I had to look at this, let's inflict that on the audience. One second.
Yes.
Oh, it's not in its full glory. 1 second.
Okay.
We can fix that. I'll brush. I'll brush. One sec. Oh, you open up in a new tab. There we go. All right.
I believe one of them is Prince Charles.
You remember correctly.
Yeah.
I'll brush. I'll brush.
Stop it. Stop it. Yeah.
Well, on that note,
Yes.
culture makes you, but you aren't just your culture. And just do your research if you're gonna be influenced or set your story in another culture.
Yes. Yeah. Because yeah, one of the worst things you could do is write something bad about or write something wrong in a culture, and then you come off looking like an idiot, and
Yep.
yeah. But and also too, don't go too overboard, because yeah.
Don't. Oh man, and the otter has a lot of fat on it, so the skin doesn't come off as cleanly. So
Yeah.
and it's a delicacy to boil the head and eat it. Though the eyes are are considered especially tasty by our culture.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Now go back to the bears ripping people's faces off.
Yes, or like the super strong guy fighting a whole group of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have a question. So
Oh,
when
yeah.
I do research for a Final Fantasy VII fan comic hentai, should I leave the Italian food and references out of Tifa's personal history?
Uh, I would say that's entirely your call.
Yes, it or original Tifa or Italian Tifa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we need to say for today.
Yes,
So
yes. We'll leave it at that. All right. Well,
thanks
thank
for
you,
watching.
everybody. Yes. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell for notifications, and be on the lookout too, because DB and I are going to be doing a review of Eden Zero.
Yes, Eden
Volume 1.
Zero.
So yes. All right. So again, thank you everybody for watching, and hopefully y'all can play the trailer. Okay, yeah, I'll be able to play it. All right. Again, thank you everybody, and see y'all next week. Good night.
Yep. Later.